Hey everybody, it's Coach Malcolm. Today in my lesson, we are going to be talking about the smother mate, and the smother mate is a very special, very interesting kind of checkmate in chess, in which you checkmate with the knight. And how the checkmate works is your opponent's king is almost always surrounded by his own pieces in the corner, and thus has no squares to move. So what do I mean by this? Well, first let's take a look at this puzzle, which is the most basic version of a smother mate to understand. So let's take 3 seconds or so. Think about this puzzle. It's a checkmate in one for white. All right, hopefully we found knight c7 is immediately checkmate for white in this position. And the reason this is a smother mate is because, first of all, we are checkmating with our knight. And second of all, this king is literally smothered by his other pieces. They are crushing down on him, and he has nowhere to go. He can't go to b8 because of his knight. He can't go to b7 because of his pawn, and he cannot go to a7 because of his pawn as well. So the king's own pieces are the reason for his downfall. And you'll notice that this king is in the corner of the board, which is very common for smother mates. It's not always what a smother mate looks like, but it is very common. So let's look at another example of a smothered mate to better understand the idea. So here we have another checkmate in one for white. This is also a dual puzzle because the smothered mate is also a very neat fork at the same time. So let's take 3 seconds or so, see if we can find this checkmate. All right, yes, knight f7, checkmate. And also, this is a fork, right? Let's just notice that because we like to incorporate other tactics into our chess thinking. But knight f7 is a smother mate. Again, we have our knight. The king is yet again in the corner. His rook and his two pawns on g7 and h7 are trapping him into the board, are trapping him. He has no squares to go, and so this is, of course, a checkmate. So now let's look at our next example, another checkmate in one. White to move. Let's keep these smother mate ideas in mind. Where can we move to end the game right here, right now? All right, hopefully we see knight g6 is our smothered checkmate. The king is again in the corner. He's blocked in by his rook. He's blocked in by his bishop and his pawn. So it doesn't always have to be two pawns. It can be a range of pieces as long as this knight obviously cannot be captured on g6, so it can deliver checkmate, and so that the king has no squares to move because his own pieces trap him in. All right, here's our next example. Again, another fork smother mate. This time, one of our own pieces helps out with this smothered mate, though. So take another 3 seconds or so. Think about this position. White to move, checkmate in one. All right, so knight f7 is our checkmate in this position. Here we have our fork, very, very similar to last time. And in this position, again, of course, it's our knight on f7 giving checkmate. The king is blocked into the corner. He's trapped by his knight and his pawn, but let's also note that our pawn on h6 is giving us a little help, so we got to give that pawn credit, but this is still considered a smother mate because for the most part, the king is locked in by his own pieces, and we have our checkmate. All right. So now we're going to start looking, we're going to try and up the level a little bit. We're going to look at some mate in twos. So these next few puzzles are going to be checkmate in twos for white, but they are still going to use a smother mate. So your first move will be a very forcing move, almost always a check. And then our second move in these positions will be with our knight, and it will be a smother mate. So let's take 5 seconds or so, think about how we can do a checkmate in two for white here and smother the black king on a8. All right, so hopefully we found this super cool, risky looking move, queen b8 check, right? And of course, the king can't take back on b8 because the knight on a6 is guarding the queen, and black's only move is to take with their rook, but now they have smothered themselves. They have trapped this king in the corner, and knight c7, this knight will swoop in. Knight c7 is checkmate. That king is trapped in the corner. His own pieces are taking up all his escape squares. And also, again, we do have a neat fork, which isn't always the case, but it's good to just notice that as well. All right, our next mate in two, a little bit different, but still a smothered mate. So let's take a few seconds to look at this one. All right, so here we do have another sacrifice, very similar to the last one, but here we're going to play rook takes h7, move one. Sorry about that. The king obviously can't take back because our knight is doing a very good job of protecting the rook. The only move for black in this position is to take with the queen, and now our knight gets to swoop into f7. You'll notice in this position, this is also a remove the guard puzzle because the queen was protecting this f7 square. She was not allowing the knight to go there. If the knight went there now, they would just simply be taken. But after we pull that queen away with rook takes h7, queen takes back, knight f7, the knight, the queen, and the pawn are all trapping this king in the corner on h8, and it allows us to have a beautiful, beautiful checkmate. All right, now our last checkmate in 2 puzzle for smothered mates. Let's take a couple more seconds to look at this one. This one's even a little bit trickier. The key to this position is this pawn on h7. All right, so obviously the first thing to notice is that the king is not on a8 and it's not in h8, so this is going to be a different kind of smothered mate. But regardless, we still play queen takes f7, sacrificing yet again. Again, this queen is guarded by the knight, so the king can't take. The king cannot go to g8 because that pawn is staring down g8, and he cannot come to e7 because of the queen as well. So black's only move is to play rook takes f7, and now we have this super cool, super pretty knight g6 checkmate. The pawn guards g8. The knight is obviously attacking the king and protecting e7. And lo and behold, again, this king is smothered by his own pieces, trapped, and he has no escape squares. And this is a great checkmate. All right. Now, the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at an opening that involves the smothered mate. And this is actually an opening that Coach West taught me when I was a student in elementary school, and I got to use it in one of my games, and it was very exciting. So I was playing white in my game, and I started off with e4. My opponent played c6, which is the Caro-Kann defense. So I played d4, d5, again, very characteristic of the Caro-Kann. They're attacking my pawn on e4, so I play knight c3 to defend that pawn. When your opponent takes your piece, you always want to make sure that you were taking back in almost every case. So I took back on e4. And now this is a little bit of a different opening. My opponent played knight d7, which is the normal move. But here I play this tricky move, queen e2. And queen e2 is not usually what is played here. And the point of it is to trip up your opponents, because in a lot of cases, they will just continue with their opening lines. So my opponent here played knight f6, which he thought was the proper continuation. But here in this position, let's stop for a second. There is a smothered checkmate in this very center of the board. Checkmate, white to move on move 6. Can you find it? All right, so yes, knight d6 checkmate. This is super cool. This pawn obviously cannot take on d6 because of this super neat pin with the queen. That's why we had to play queen e2. And now black is obviously in checkmate. He is trapped in by the knight, the queen, 2 pawns, and the bishop. So this is the very definition of a smothered mate. All of these pieces are trapping this black king in. He has no squares. And on move 6, I was able to win one of my games. Okay, guys. So that's the end of our lesson today. Smothered mates are a super cool type of checkmate. I hope you guys get to use them in your games. Thank you for watching. Bye, everybody.